Welcome to the Empowered podcast series, a podcast series by the Maryland State Bar Association Leadership Academy Fellows on children's special education rights in Maryland and empowering parents and families to best support their students with disabilities in their lives.
Hi, and thank you for joining the MSBA Leadership Academy in our fourth and final episode of our Empowered podcast series. My name is Golnaz Alamasavi.
Hi, I'm Faith Durej, and we are two MSBA Leadership Academy Fellows.
And in today's Empowered podcast episode, we will be discussing the special education process through a parent's perspective.
Joining us today is our guest, Frances Shefter, a parent of two daughters who both have individualized education plans. Our guest is especially knowledgeable because she is also an education attorney, the principal attorney and founder of Shefter Law in Rockville, Maryland.
Frances brings valuable insight as an education attorney, helping other parents advocate for their children in special education law. She also has her own podcast called Stress-Free IEP, in which she discusses education law and other topics with other knowledgeable guests. Frances will be sharing her experiences as a parent who navigated the IEP process for her two children. Frances is uniquely qualified to discuss all aspects of IEPs. Prior to law school, she was a teacher and she managed a special education department. Through her extensive background, she is a well-rounded resource for families in Maryland facing challenges with IEPs and 504s. Welcome to Empowered, Frances.
Thank you, Frances, for taking time out of your busy legal practice to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Kind of as, an introduction, can you briefly discuss your children's educational backgrounds before pursuing an IEP?
Sure. So starting with my older daughter, Hannah, she at the age, I want to say about 18 months, did not have the language that I thought she should have. And it's funny because even knowing what I did for a living, a friend of mine said, "Oh, just wait, she'll develop." And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not waiting. So I called infants and toddlers with Montgomery County and started the process. She was found eligible. It was actually kind of funny because her receptive language was off the charts. And so the speech and language pathologist that was doing the assessment had so much fun because she never got that far because it's not usual to have that much of a discrepancy. So she started on an IEP for just speech. It wasn't until she was, I want to say 9 or had just turned 10, I'm not sure, I'll have to go back and look, but that we got the autism diagnosis with PDA profile. So while her IEP originally was just speech and did have some behavior goals, it was then switched to autism. With my younger child, her kindergarten year, at the end of the year, her teacher brought me in and we were talking about how she's behind. I love her kindergarten teacher because she had my older daughter also. And she said, well, she seems to be a little behind in reading, but the screener showed no indicators for dyslexia. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. So since it was the end of the school year, I chose to get both of my children evaluated privately. And then that's when I started the autism change for Hannah and started the IEP process for Esther.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. So I know you sort of mentioned evaluations and diagnoses as kind of that first step in initiating the IEP process. And can you talk a little bit about where you go from there once someone is diagnosed?
So you don't actually have to have a private evaluation or a diagnosis for an IEP. The school can do the evaluation. While they can't diagnose, they can say that there are characteristics of and find a child eligible that way. The school's evaluations are fine. They're good. They focus on the educational. Due to the timing of the year is why I chose to go private, because over the summer it would have been a summer team that didn't know my kids. So I figured if I was going to do that, I might as well pay for private. That was my choice. But so if you have a private evaluation because you chose not to go through the school, or you just happen to have a private evaluation, you bring that to the school system and tell them you want to start the child find process. And the school has 30 days to respond, to have a meeting to review that evaluation, determine eligibility, not eligible, or whether more information is needed.
Okay, so now that you've brought that evaluation to the school, what are the next steps from there and how involved are you in those meetings and assessments with the school?
So As the parent, I am 100% fully involved in all of the IEP meetings. And as any parent, the law is clear about meaningful participation, meaning you can ask questions. And if you don't understand things, ask. So after the assessment is completed, there is the meeting to review the assessments. And that's whether it's an independent one or whether the school does. And that's the eligibility meeting. For that, like for me, how I prepare and how I tell other parents to prepare is I read the evaluation and I highlight when I have questions or underline if I have questions so that I can get things clarified and make sure that I fully understand what the school is seeing so that I can help develop a better IEP.
Did you face any challenges or obstacles during the IEP process? If so, how did you overcome them?
So when she was still in preschool with my older daughter, the school, I noticed that she was having an issue with recalling some words. Like she would know the word, but not be able to articulate what the word was, but she could like do a sign for it. Like she was trying to come up with the word soup, which we knew she knew. She was almost in kindergarten, but she would go, you know, that thing. And she would show like she was slurping soup from a spoon. So I wanted her evaluated more. And I went to the school and we were at the IEP meeting and the school saying, oh, we should, wait and see, give her a chance to start kindergarten, we need to wait and maybe she'll develop. And with my background and my knowledge, I was like, no, we're not waiting and seeing. I need the evaluation now. And they're like, well, we need to do research-based interventions. I'm like, okay, here are the research-based interventions that the preschool has been working on. And they just kind of looked at me and I said, oh, let me fully introduce myself. And then I ran down my credentials. Right. So I shouldn't have had to do that, but that's where I was. Mm-hmm. And once I ran down my credentials, after they picked their jaws up off the floor, they were like, oh, okay, which evaluations do you want? And I was able to get all of the evaluations. And I was so frustrated because I shouldn't have to pull out my law degree and my special ed background and all the other thing to get what my child needed at that point. Yeah. So, I mean, we help families a lot with that. But what I tell families is just make sure you have your data to support it. Because had they not given me what I wanted, the next step would have been to do an administrative review and take it a level higher within Montgomery County to say, hey, this school is wrong. This is what you need. Mm-hmm. And it's just making sure we have our own data to support it.
Exactly. So obviously your background helped you, navigate through this process. But for parents who don't have the background you do or the knowledge you do, what are some things that support or resources or things you think would be helpful from parents who don't sort of come from that background or have previous experience with an older child who went through it, someone who's kind of in it for the first time?
I mean, resources, I have my YouTube channel, Shefter Law PA, that has, I think I'm up to 200 videos, maybe, that has a lot of free resources. I have them on my website also. I did a presentation, X Minds, if you're in Montgomery County. X Minds is a nonprofit for autistic children. And I did a presentation, how to prepare for an IEP meeting. Oh. Yeah. And so, Google it, find resources, prepare. What I always say is go into the IEP meeting with as much knowledge as you can find. Have data to support everything. Don't let the school blindside you. One of the things I always recommend is read the evaluation. If you have somebody that can read it with you or, review it for you also, pull out things that you say, wait a minute, this sounds like my child needs support. So that you have data, their own data to use against, I don't say against them, but your own data to make your argument.
To push back.
Right, to push back. Well, you said right here that, ABC, so how can you say in this meeting that it's not?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think your resources are very, very helpful. I've actually heard your podcast, seen them. They're actually really fun to watch as well. And so I think you definitely would be a great resource, especially in Maryland. We were wondering if there are any specific documents or forms that are difficult for parents to navigate that you would say, might need additional help from an expert?
So in Maryland, their new alternative learning outcomes form is a bear. It is absolutely nuts. And that is something that really matters if you think you're going to disagree with the school. So alternative learning outcomes are basically taking the children off of the diploma track, and they started as early as pre-kindergarten. So it matters. And what happens in that meeting and, can really make a difference, even though if the school finds your child eligible for alternative learning outcomes, you can disagree and the school can't switch them. But I've had a case where the school wanted to find the children not eligible for alternative learning outcomes. They were trying to switch a middle schooler back to general education curriculum, and my clients were dead set against it. So we fully prepared for the IEP meeting with all of the data so that when they did that form, it didn't automatically come up for ALO, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, when you say that it can change, for example, make it so that they wouldn't be on the track for a diploma, could you clarify that?
Yes. So alternative learning outcomes, that is, in Maryland, we have the core standards and the standards for Maryland high school diploma. And those are the guidelines that the schools have to, for each grade, the standards that they have to teach to the kids and the kids have to meet. So when you put a child on alternative learning outcomes, you're saying they don't need to learn those grade level standards. They're going to learn alternative ways. So they might still learn math, but it could be a 7th grader doing an addition because that's the level they are.
I see. So how did the IEP ultimately help your children, their experience in school?
So the IEP helps this school to know what is going on with my child, describes my child, and focuses on what they need to be successful. And so for my older child, obviously the speech services got her articulation up there, her language up there, her expressive language. Now people don't believe me when I say she was delayed in speaking because she doesn't stop talking a lot.
Oh, that's great.
Right, which is great. And now with the autism, the behaviors, the IEP is teaching her how to cope with the stressors of school and how to appropriately self-regulate and what she needs to do. And for my younger one with the dyslexia and dysgraphia, she's getting pulled for services, and they're giving her that extra help in reading and writing that she needs to help pull her up to grade level.
So you saw a academic and social development after the IEP was implemented?
Yes, for both of my kids. Esther with her ADHD, that's the one with the dyslexia and dysgraphia, my younger one, once the ADHD was aware by the teacher, she could help the teacher was able to help keep Esther on track, which helped academically. And socially, for my older daughter, her understanding her autism, her having her safe person, and her knowing when I need a break really helped, on the social side as well, because instead of her exploding on her friends or, when they just said something simple, she would be like, I need a break.
Yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like it definitely makes a difference in a child's life, especially if you know what to push for. If the school system is telling you differently and you know that what they're telling you is not correct and you know how to push for what your children need, it seems like it can really make a difference.
What I like to tell parents also is that trust your gut. Moms and dads, we 100%, we have that instinct. We know something's not right. We might not know what. We might not be able to verbalize it, but we know something is there. Don't let the administrators, don't let the teachers, don't let anyone sway you from figuring out what it is.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And looking back, is there anything that you wish you had done differently during the process of getting the IEP for your children?
I would say for Esther, I wish I had noticed it earlier. For Hannah, although it turned out fine, I think for Hannah, I would have done the private evaluation sooner. I had suspicion of autism because of the sensory issues she has. But the problem was that her social is off the charts. She does eye contact. She has total conversations with people on any topic whatsoever. She can hold a conversation with an adult, with, a child, and like all of these other major signs for autism she had. And so I should have pursued it more. But this was before I knew anything about PDA, but I knew something was there. And I knew the school wouldn't be able to find it because the school doesn't always dig deep enough.
So, Frances, do you feel like the IEP process gave your children the support they needed? Were there any areas that could be improved?
So, yes, the IEP process gave my children the support they needed in school to the abilities of the school. And I say it that way because, like, for Esther with dyslexia and dysgraphia, the school can only do so much in the hours that they have her. And in order to fully give her what she needed, she needs like an hour 3 times a week. I don't want her out of the classroom for an hour 3 times a week. 20 minutes a day, 4 times a week is perfect, and that's what the school can do, that she's not missing a lot of curriculum. So I supplemented just by choice. If I had left it just to the school, she probably would catch up. But being the parent that I am, I wanted to intensify it a little bit more when she was younger. For my older child, for Hannah, when the IEP is implemented correctly and the teacher follows it, it is 100% the support she needs that she can be successful in school. I have her school team is absolutely phenomenal. And we were able to, devise an IEP and figure out, like, what does she need? Like, one of the things we realized is lunch and recess is just such sensory overload for her that she needs a break. And so she leaves recess 5 minutes early, goes in colors, does what she needs to do to regulate, and then she's off to math. And we noticed this because she was having issues in math. And I'm like, but that's her favorite subject. She excels in math. Once we implemented, figured this out and implemented this through her IEP, all of a sudden everything was fine in math again.
I'm glad to hear that the process worked well for them and they were supported within the school systems. But what about maybe parents who find that that's not the case in the school system their child is a part of? As we know, the school system can vary depending on where you live in the world. So what are some things parents can maybe do if they're finding themselves running into issues regarding their child's progress, after an IEP is implemented, if they don't think that their child is meeting those benchmarks that they should be?
Those are the cases where you want to push for more services or a more restrictive environment. More restrictive environment means more with special education kids and outside of the general education classroom. And what I always like to tell parents is that you need to know your final outcome, though. You need to know what you want. So, for example, if a parent wants their child to stay in their home school, you don't want to push for an extensive amount of more services that can't be implemented in that place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you push for more restrictive, you're going to be in a special ed classroom potentially. And so one of the things that I always say is, know what your outcome is and then find the data to support and to get it put where it is.
Frances, how can parents build a positive and collaborative relationship with their children's school to ensure that their child's needs are being met through the IEP?
So I always go into IEP meetings as a mom and as the attorney with a collaborative mindset. It's all about my child. I have one client that always brings a picture of her child and sets it up so like everybody sees this is who we're talking about to refocus. And I also never accuse teachers of not doing things, even though I know they're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's that like, well, so this part of the IEP, how is that being implemented? And let them call themselves out, basically. The other thing that I always recommend is at the beginning of the school year, which I keep saying I'm going to do this letter and I haven't done it yet. At the beginning of the school year, do a letter to the teacher of like, hey, I know you're overwhelmed with all of the kids you have. I just want to give you a quick highlight of my child.
That's a good idea.
An IEP is 35 pages long. From my gen ed teaching days, I looked at the IEP, put it in a drawer. I probably looked at it again before the IEP meeting. Like, the reality is we don't have time to fully implement and know everything. And if something happens, to be able to, for the teacher to automatically remember, oh yeah, in her IEP, I'm supposed to do X, Y, Z. So just kind of like that beginning. So for me, I do it at open house if I don't do it written, and I'll go up to the teacher and be like, hey, just want to let you know her IEP, she needs a safe space to go. Did you find one in the classroom yet? And like just know that they have it identified, because that's one of the biggest things for my child is she needs to go in a place that nobody can see her. And so it's like letting the teacher know, like, these are the important things. And if she asks to go to her safe person, don't forget that's her self-regulating type stuff. So it's like give the teacher start in that collaborative mode at the beginning of the school year, and it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think in a perfect world, obviously, every single student's IEP would be fulfilled and met exactly how it needs to be. But we don't live in a perfect world. And like you said, sort of towards the beginning of our conversation, no one knows your child like you. So I think, the onus kind of has to come back on the parents to advocate and push and, do some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's definitely, I put it on us. Like, yes, it's the school's responsibility, but as the Supreme Court said, they only have to provide the Chevrolet, not the Cadillac. And most of us parents, no matter where we are in our lives, socioeconomic status or anything, every parent wants Cadillacs for their children.
Of course.
We want the best for our kids, right?
Yeah.
So push as much as you can and supplement if you have to.
Hmm. So, kind of putting your hat on as a parent and your hat on as a professional in this field, what is a common problem maybe you've seen or identified within the public school system throughout the IEP process, or identified within the public school system throughout the IEP process?
The first biggest is the wait and see, because as we all know, any educator will tell you that the earlier you get services, the better. So it's absolutely not never wait and see. It's, no, we need to evaluate now. The other mishap that's happening a lot now is that, well, your kid's on grade level and getting straight A's, there can't be they would not qualify for an IEP, which is not true. It's not, is your child on grade level and getting grades? It's, is your child accessing the general education curriculum? So, for example, we have a child that's getting straight A's and is off the charts on academic, above grade level on everything, but is only in the classroom 50% of the time. Well, that's an educational impact, and that's what you need to fight for. Because even though your child is compensating or overcompensating in other ways academically, it's your child is still not getting what your child is entitled to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you've provided a lot of advice. We feel like our audience can learn a lot from your personal and professional experience. Is there any additional advice that you would like our listeners to take away from our podcast series, especially in this episode?
Trust your gut. That's my biggest thing as parents. If something doesn't feel right, it doesn't. There's something going on. I hate using right and wrong because there's nothing wrong with our children that are neurodiverse, but that gut feeling that something's just not settled here, and it's trusted. And don't give up. Keep pushing. If the school won't do it, I call it the Shefter way because my dad was like that. If the school won't do it, go to the next level. My dad was always like, yeah, you can't at this level. Now let me go above your head. And if that person can't do it, go above their head. And if that so like those are the ways you can do it on your own if you can't bring in an advocate or an attorney. But just don't take no for an answer. Okay, you can't. Who do I go to next? Where do I go next? And don't give up. Just fight, because you are your child's biggest advocate and best advocate. And if you don't keep fighting, then your child's not going to get everything your child deserves in the education system.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, Frances, thank you again for joining us today. This discussion on the IEP process and the public school system is incredibly important for our listeners, and it's been great that you've been able to speak from the perspective as a parent and also a professional. So thank you again, and we truly appreciate the time and insight you've shared with us.
And we encourage our listeners to reach out to MSBA or Frances Shefter directly with any questions, and check out Ms. Shefter's very informative podcast, Stress-Free IEP.
Frances, how can our listeners find your podcast or contact you?
If you Google Frances Shefter, everything should pop up. Shefter Law PA is my website. I have all of my social media links. I have my blog posts. I have the podcasts, everything there, including a contact form to start the intake process, and call now if you just want to call and talk to my assistant and see if we are a good match or how we can help you.
We will also share Ms. Shefter's contact details on our podcast information page. We hope this podcast helped you feel more empowered to navigate the special education process for your children. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Please join us on our other Empowered episodes and share this series with others. You can find MSBA on Facebook and Instagram. The information provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship, and the content should not be relied upon as a substitute for legal counsel. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maryland State Bar Association.